Point in time, I would like to hand over to my colleague Lavinia Karanja, who is on the other side, to give us a brief on what is happening. Lavinia, to you.
We do apologize for the loss of sound, but yes, we are gathered here, as Hassan mentioned, at the Nairobi National Park to witness a historic and monumental ivory burning of 105 stockpiles of ivory and 101.35 rather rhino horns. And just talking about this event, it's such a monumental and significant event, signaling and sending out a message and a direct statement to the world to join hands to bring together the end to poaching and illegal ivory trade that is detrimental to this species, our endangered species of elephants and rhino. I'm now joined by my guests to just elaborate more on what we expect for today and the poaching crisis. Marco Lembartini of WWF International. Thank you very much for joining me. If we just talk about the Wildlife Act that was passed in 2013, where you worked together with the government. If you just tell us about the act.
Well, the act is a very important move in order to do two things. First of all, assert the importance of wildlife conservation per se, but also I think for the development, sustainable development of the country. So we've been actually privileged to be able to support the government development such an important piece of legislation that is dealing with the natural heritage of Kenya, but also is looking at how the country can actually benefit from such a rich diversity of wildlife that you are being able to conserve to now.
And as I understand, the Wildlife Act, it puts stricter measures against poachers. If you just elaborate on what measures those are.
Yeah, I mean, the government or Kenya has shown actually in the last 50 years leadership about dealing with the issue of poaching, which is affecting wildlife and people at the same time. And I want to stress this point because the ivory that we are burning today, that the government is torching today, is not just tainted with elephant blood. It's actually tainted with people's blood as well. All the wardens that had lost their life or have been injured during this fight. And they're actually destroying something that symbolizes an economic asset for the country. Live elephants are worth much more than the ivory that it can be obtained from them. And I think this is such a strong message. And if you like, the Wildlife Act, the legislation of the country today reflects exactly this philosophy. Wildlife is important per se, but also for the sustainable development of Kenya and its people.
You make a very great point about wildlife being more valuable when they're alive. And there was a recent statistic about elephants in the lifespan of a single elephant. It would generate up to 76% in terms of tourism revenue, more than it would for its ivory.
Absolutely. I would say poaching and illegal ivory trade make a few people rich, while the live elephant help a lot of people with their livelihoods. I mean, of course, we have to deal with the conflict that sometimes emerges between such a big animals and such an expansive species like humans, and we need to deal with the conflict between people and elephants very carefully, very seriously. But I think we can do that, and WWF is also engaging with the Kenyan government to really work out a proper spatial plan that look where to produce, where to develop, where to put agriculture, industry and all the rest, infrastructures, and where we have to keep nature wild. The two things can coexist. It's all come down to good planning, good land use planning, bringing together all the stakeholders and coming up with an intelligent plan. And this is what we're trying to help the government to come up with.
And in the bid to ending poaching, the crisis, Botswana adopted a shoot-to-kill policy. Do you think Kenya should even push further these stricter measures against poachers?
Yeah, that's a delicate question, and frankly, I mean, we have to recognize out there is a war right now. The poachers of the 21st century are not the poachers of 40 years ago. These are people connected to criminal gangs, heavily armed, sometimes trained, better and with higher technology than a warden. So it's a really hard conflict. It's not that we have jobs to advise the government on how to protect their wardens, their people, and their wildlife. These policies are discussed case by case, government by government, and even place by place. So I don't think I have any comment on that. I'm just going to say that we feel very much for the actual losses of lives in the fight against poaching on both sides. But let's remember the wardens that they're risking their life every day, and they're really true nature and wildlife heroes, and they need to be protected as well.
And aside from burning ivory stockpile today, the biggest stockpile today, we need to also advocate for campaigns, especially in the Asian markets, to desensitize people against poaching. There's a myth behind our rhino horns that it has medicinal purposes, yet we know it's made out of keratin, which is the same as our nails. So what can we do further in terms of campaigning?
So the great thing about our organization is also that we have national organizations everywhere in the world. So actually today here we have a delegation from WWF Thailand who has just met the Minister of Environment, and it shows the importance of connecting the two big areas, source and demand, in the regions, and the region of Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, China, Hong Kong, Thailand, Vietnam, that are really driving right now the demand. The encouraging thing is that there is a growing awareness in Asia, particularly in the young generation and the middle class, against poaching, and the government are beginning to respond to that. So we heard a few months ago the Chinese government, the Hong Kong government, the Thai government making strong commitments to ban domestic trade of ivory.
Including Beijing.
Including Beijing, and this is super important because banning domestic trade is going to really drive demand down. Of course, in parallel with awareness, but we need also strong legislation in those countries.
So you're saying key to ending the poaching crisis is the burn of ivory, removing the economic value of it, and also driving a campaign against it.
Yeah, well, the burn of ivory is really a message, right? Is a strong message, but and if you like, some people agree, some people disagree with burning or not burning. The message, however, is very strong. Nobody can deny that. A government that decides to have a big event like this, invest resources and effort in this, is showing leadership from the top. And this is one of the key dimensions of winning against poaching. We need the political will from the top, being able to percolate down to the ground, and then we need also the other key dimension is demand in the countries where the ivory is bought, and the third one is, of course, and I haven't mentioned yet, but it's super important, really engage the communities, because the communities need to feel the benefit of conserving wildlife and wild places, particularly the communities interfacing wildlife and wild spaces. They need to really feel that they actually are better off living beside natural environment than not. And so these are the key dimensions that we need to tackle together. One alone won't solve the problems, but as I said, we did it 30 years ago when there was another big peak of poaching crisis, and I think I can feel that the environment is right. We can win it again.
And as a nation, we can't do this alone. This is a war that we're fighting, as you have said so rightly. What do you think the global community can do in terms of impacting, driving, and supporting this initiative?
Well, coming together, this is the key thing. But I have to say, I think we are seeing this coming together already. The African countries that joined President Kenyatta in this event, there was a conference yesterday with 4 very important elephant countries in Africa. All the support that the position of Kenya is receiving internationally, this is already happening. So there is a mounting strong coalition that is really calling for a strong effort to really curb poaching, using all the different tools that I mentioned before.
Thank you very much. Finally, what do you think are the future prospects for our nation and for Africa with the conservation of these endangered species?
So we got to do, first of all, we have to really delete poaching, because this is the most imminent threat to charismatic species, which are the ones driving particularly ecotourism, and so a big component of the tourism industry in the country and in many other countries. So that's one thing. But also we need to think beyond poaching. We need to think of how we preserve natural habitats. We need to think how we can connect those natural places between themselves, allowing wildlife to roam like they used to do in many years ago, and strike the right balance between development and conservation. I am of course very sad to see what's happening today, because we are in the center of the crisis, but I really have a lot of hope in seeing the response of the government, response of the international community, and the public in so many countries. So as I said, we did it 30 years ago. We can do it again.
We can indeed. Thank you so much, Marco Lembartini. That was Marco Lembartini, WWF General Director. As we speak right now, President Uhuru has arrived. I will now hand over to Dan Kaburu, who will tell us more.